Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and this week on the podcast, I speak to Dr. Cliff Harvey and Darren Ellis to talk about their latest book and first joint collaboration in this space, Awesome After 40. It is such a great conversation, guys. We chat about the inception of the book, their current thoughts on all things strength training, fitness, nutrition, health, sleep, fasting, supplements, and give teasers as to what you'll be able to find in the book. This is going to be a must-have for almost everybody on their shelves to be able to dive in on any given topic. It's practical, applicable, and readable, but they haven't dumbed things down. They're so good at translating that science into information that you understand, but also feel like you're learning as well. This would be a perfect gift for anyone you love at Christmas, be it male, female, whether they're already 40, about to turn 40, or they were 40 about 15 years ago. Now, I've had Cliff and Darren on the podcast several times. Cliff Harvey, PhD, is New Zealand's expert on the effects of a ketogenic diet in a healthy population, but he is so much more than that. He has been helping people to live healthier, happier lives and to perform better since starting in clinical practice in the late 1990s. Over this time, he has been privileged to work with many Olympic, professional, Commonwealth, and other high-performing athletes. He has also worked with many people to overcome the effects of chronic and debilitating health conditions. Along the way, he has founded or co-founded many successful businesses in the health, fitness, and wellness space, including Holistic Performance Institute, New Zealand's leading certification and diploma for health, nutrition, health coaching, and performance that has many of the world experts teaching on the course, so students are learning from the best. Cliff has over 20 years experience as a strength and nutrition coach, and in addition to his PhD research, he's a registered clinical nutritionist, qualified naturopath, and holds a diploma in fitness training and health coaching and patient care. You can find Cliff over at cliffharvey.com or at Holistic Performance Institute. Darren Ellis, MSc, has an aim to share what he's learned with as many people as possible, teaching them that there are no shortcuts with exercise, can be achievable and even fun with good coaching and a supportive peer group. He is a regular contributor to a variety of popular print and web-based health and fitness magazines. He's a public speaker and consultant to sporting organisations, businesses, universities, and television. His specialties are strength training and nutrition for fitness, sport, weight loss, muscle gain, and longevity. And he has a very active social media presence. And you can learn a lot from following Darren over on Instagram. And he can be found at www.darrenellis.coach. And I've got links as to where to find both of these guys over in the show notes. And keep an eye out because we are going to be running a giveaway for the Awesome After 40 book. So you guys can get your hands on a copy for yourselves. Before we crack on into the interview though, I would like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of Wikipedia and amongst literally thousands of other podcasts out there. So more people get to hear from experts that I have on the show, like Cliff and Dazza. All right, guys, enjoy the conversation. I get so many compliments on your behalf for the conversations that we have. Like, all three of us.
People just love banter, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. And they like to be a fly in the wall, because I'm the same. I like to be a fly on the wall for listening to the conversations between people who I follow to see, what do they really think? Or what is it that, what are the things that they talk about? And of course, if they're wondering what you guys really think, well, you've just brought out your book.
Yeah. Do we show them our Scientology handshake or do we keep that secret?
Oh, I love it. Hey, so Darren Ellis, Cliff Harvey, welcome to Wikipedia podcast on this beautiful Friday morning in Auckland. And I'm sure it's beautiful down the line, Daz, in Tauranga.
Very much so, yeah.
Love it. I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about your book. I got ChatGPT to whip me up a bunch of questions on it, which is more, it's it's just sort of like big topic questions. I'm like, oh, I like these, I'll keep these. But first, I just want to kick off to ask you, what possessed you to write a book? Is it just because, I mean, I know Cliff, you like to write books. You've got multiple books.
It's like breathing for Cliff. It's just like breathing.
I know.
Another one.
Yeah. So talk me through what made you want to write a book, and I'll just leave it to you as to decide who talks first.
Mate, if I could start with how I sort of recall the conversation was, conversations, right? We have so many of them. Whenever we're together, naturally we start talking about the industry and our own experiences. And as I recall, we were chatting about a book by Dan John and Pavel Satsulin, and the style of it being that it was two in the trenches, well-respected strength coaches, and it was like a conversation. The book was sort of written like it was a conversation between these two giants, talking about what works for them and the things that they've discovered and figured out along the journey. And and Cliff said it would be cool to write something along those lines. And then he couldn't find anybody else, so he asked me.
Yeah, I think it was very much a serendipitous thing, because obviously we had that conversation, but, you know, I've wanted to do something with Daz for many years, basically since we met. And I don't know when that was exactly, but it must have been around 2011 or so when I came, although I've known of Daz before that, but it must have been when I came back from Canada. But, you know, Mikki, you mentioned that I've written other books. The reality is that, you know, when you're writing things when you're younger, they come from a far more naive place. And it's not to say that they don't have value to maybe someone out there, but, you know, I think as well that if you look back on what you've done, you know, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, and you're not a little bit embarrassed about it, you haven't really grown and evolved. And when I look back at some of those early works, they were, to my mind now, very naive, very immature, and like some of them weren't that good, like straight up, right? And I think nowadays it's interesting because a lot of the concepts that come through this book, I think, are also emblematic of the book's process, and particularly where I'm at, because in the past I've very much rushed. So rushed to finish a book, rushed to get it out. You know, if there's an error, well, every book I've ever read, I've found an error in. So just put it out anyway. And this time around, it was a very different process for me, where I wanted to not just do the book justice and feel confident in the book in its finished form, but I also wanted to, you know, do that to appreciate Daz as well, and not to have something that gets out there that we couldn't both be very proud of. So I think in reality, out of all the books I've written, I'd probably say 3 are okay. 2 of them are pretty decent. And this one, I think, is a good book. It's a very good book that I'm very proud of, and I'm stoked to have written it with Daz, and I think it will give people a lot of value.
I love that. And I love how the genesis of it was based on, you know, another piece of work from people that you guys both respect hugely. But also this will be quite a different book, because to your point, Cliff, about the naivety of what you found in your own writing, because you were young and you don't have that experience, and that real world experience speaks to so much. And I think both of you, given your age, I mean, if you don't have experience at this point, it's got to be something seriously wrong with you. No, just not just based on your age, but, you know, like, but a lot of our knowledge doesn't just come from the research and the ivory towers and possibly where we might have leaned on that early in our careers because we didn't have the decades of understanding how to apply that to people and what happens there, I guess.
Yeah, it's the difference between information and wisdom, I guess, and still hesitating to say any kind of wise, but we can get hold of so much info out there. And I'm so impressed with what some of the whiz kids are able to do and put out, these days. But the truth is, if you don't have the time to sit with and experiment with and try and fail and stubbornly try again with the same thing because you're sure that that's right, and then finally realize begrudgingly that maybe there's something to some other thing, and there's just no getting around the time factor. with that.
And I think one thing that comes about, and I'm sure this will evolve even more, hopefully 10, 15 years later, we're saying, you know what, we're so much more wise now.
Yeah.
Because no one can claim to be wise. It's a process, right? But I think when you're younger as well, you are more insecure in yourself, even if you think that you know who you are. And now at this point in my life, I don't think you can ever know entirely who you are. You can just put out what you can in the best way that you can and leave it up to people to accept it or not. It's kind of like the fall in or fuck off kind of mentality. I'm trying to do the best I can. If you dig it, great. If you don't, that's cool as well. Whereas when you're younger, I think a lot of what you're putting out there is to try and project a certain position, a certain status that you have. And there comes a point where you realize all of that is fairly arbitrary and it doesn't matter.
I love it. So, Awesome After 40 is the name of the book. And you've got, yeah, exactly, of which I think we can all attest to being. We are all awesome after 40.
Are you after 40, Mick?
Right, cool. I love it, Cliff. I love it.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I'm getting all the comments going, what about 50? And I'm like, all right, well, we wrote it. I was in my 40s when we wrote it. It just got published when I was 50.
Good things take time, Des. Good things take
Absolutely.
time. Yeah.
You're still after 40, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, technically, right?
Yeah. So, time-tested strength, nutrition, and lifestyle techniques to be healthy, happy, and strong after 40. First question is, what can people... who is this for, actually? And let's address... It's not an elephant in the room, but you guys are two blokes, and I know that particularly, Daz, you work with a lot of menopausal women. And Cliff, I know that, you have a more bespoke clientele maybe with your app and who you work individually with, I'm not sure. But this is not to take away from your experience in that age group as well. But are we buying this for our partners, our best guy mates, our husbands, or is it, obviously I'm talking from my perspective here as a woman, or for our besties and, giving it away as, prizes at Mondays Matter? Like, who's it for?
I mean, I could jump in with a little story here because a few years back, as you know, Mick, we've talked about it on the podcast before, I restarted my online coaching because I've never stopped practice, but obviously I've had other things on with, research and starting the institute and all those types of things. But I've always kept a stable of clients, but I was typically doing that on a consultation basis. But a couple of years back, I went back to online coaching, which I really enjoy because it's got that consistency of contact with people. You really create those relationships with them. It's more like when we used to be, more in the gym personal training, and I really dig that. But anyway, I thought, well, who's the market for this? And I don't like to overly define a market, but it is important to do, obviously, when you're starting a new venture and branding and whatnot. So I thought the reality is they're probably going to be people like me. They might be former athletes, or they might be, people in business. They might be people with kids. They're probably going to be guys who just want to get back and be strong, healthy, functional again, living their best lives kind of thing. And so I just branded it the way that I would dig it with, fairly masculine type branding. Not that I think of myself as a particularly masculine dude. As you know, I was kicked out of high school for wearing skirts and nail polish and all that kind of stuff. Don't feel like I'm particularly gendered, but I just put it out there in the way that I did, expecting that my clientele would be guys like me. What happened? Probably 75% of my clients are women between, say, 30 and 50. Why? Because they obviously dig what I'm putting out. They like the information. They like the simple approach to strength, simple approaches to nutrition, lifestyle, etc. And so I think with this book, and, Daz will give his perspective, but I think we just put it out there from a really pure place. It was just chuck it out there, put out what we would like to see, and whoever digs that, digs it, right? And so we've had a few questions, is this geared towards me, and is it, appropriate for women? Of course it is. Because as you know, Mikki, and all that work that we've done as well in this area, although sure, you could say that women aren't small men. To a large degree, the things that work are the things that work.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like strength training doesn't work for everybody. And simple time-effective techniques are really effective for anybody. Appropriate approaches to nutrition, sleep, stress, etc. I mean, they're universal, right? And so the thing is, it's for anyone who is in a similar position where they want somewhat time effective, simple approaches to health that cut through the bullshit.
Yeah, same, basically.
Yeah.
I guess if I had to choose a gender, I would say I prefer working with women because I'm also not really what I'd call a manly man. It's funny that Cliff, we like sort of maybe talking blokey. We do blokey things. We like fighting, like BJJ, things like that. Like what these sort of manly things. You know, if we were painting that black and white brush, but at the same time, we don't think of ourselves that way. And yeah, my following on Instagram is close to 70% women, which is interesting. And yeah, I find working with women less ego, more willing to learn, more willing to try new things. And it's often, for me, it's a far easier coaching process. And then the guys I tend to attract are of a similar mindset, you know, in that sense. So yeah, it's definitely my preference. And yeah, with two guys sort of having a chat, so to speak, talking about the things that we have learned over our lives, and I think that's very applicable to any gender.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I have seen on, of course, social media, because that's where we, you know, this is where I'm thinking about as to where I would even see this information. Yes, and where I live. There's almost always pushback when a male professes to know how to train a female, or that, you know, like you don't have this lived experience. In fact, saw yesterday someone saying you don't have this lived experience of what it's like to be a perimenopausal woman, and I'm like, mate, if that's what you needed to fully be able to coach someone to their best optimal health, then I mean, that doesn't even make sense to me. Like it says nothing about experience of working with people like that, or indeed, you know, knowledge base garnered from education, etc.
I think there is a place for it, you know, and I think that when one has a lived experience, that does provide them an additional perspective, which is important, you know. Like in the volunteer work I do, particularly with our sort of communities here, the Romani community, etc. It's really important that we're speaking from the perspective of the Romani community and its traditions and the elders, you know, and their perspective is paramount because they have the lived experience of the culture and whatnot. And I think the same thing is true in health, but it doesn't preclude someone from being really effective as a coach for a particular person. And then it's about the person who wants to be coached. And if you go to someone who's getting great results, you know, let's say a perimenopausal woman who's getting great results being coached by Daz, do you think someone coming in from the outside and saying you shouldn't be coached by Daz because he's not a perimenopausal woman, they're just going to say, bugger off. Like, Daz is awesome. Why the hell wouldn't I want to be coached by him? And I think that's where that sort of pragmatic middle ground is. And people like yourself and, you know, Karen and Lauren Colenso Semple and others are quite vocal about that. Like, if someone's putting out great information and they're helping you achieve your goals, what's wrong with that? They don't need to have a particular avatar. And it plays into what we were talking about before, right? It's really funny when I look on social media, because I have my news feeds blocked usually. But if I unblock them on Facebook, it's really interesting the stuff that I get, and particularly the advertisements, because it's obviously reading certain demographic information about me. I'm a male who does jujitsu and lifts weights and all this kind of stuff. So I just get like hard right stuff. Like, it's real alpha bro kind of advertising. And it's like, it's anathema to me because I look at it and go, that's not me. That's kind of gross. Like, I don't dig that. So it's really interesting how you can be characterized by the things you do rather than the ethos you hold. And, you know, we talked about that a lot when we founded Newsiest, because we had really different people getting on board. We had people like Darren, who was the best CrossFitter in the country. We had, you know, people like Ma'a Nonu. We had top BJJ athletes, but we also had vegan hippies and yoga instructors and all sorts. The thing is, they actually shared a common ethos of health and sustainability. And that was the key thing that bound them together. It wasn't how they looked or what they were necessarily doing. It was more how they felt and how they thought about the world.
When I was glancing through your book, and just reading on topics, like I dive straight to the nutrition stuff, just because, that's my wheelhouse, as you know. And
do you do nutrition?
It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was looking at information on alcohol, caffeine, fasting, etc. And at first glance, someone might be a little bit frustrated by you guys, because you're not out there telling me what to do at all. In fact, and I think some people would find that quite frustrating, actually. So as they're reading it, they're like, caffeine, like, is it good or bad? Fasting, good or bad? Ultimately, though, when you do read it, it sort of gives that almost, what you mentioned, auto-regulation quite a few times, and we can sort of talk about what that means, just so people are, understand what you mean by that. I mean, I think they will, but let's just clarify that. But also, what it does is it forces the reader to actually think about it in their own context, because you're asking questions about their lifestyle, you're asking about their preferences, you're asking about their own sort of biofeedback, and then you're getting them to think about it in the context of fasting, caffeine, alcohol, etc. So it's more of a choose your own adventure rather than this is what you need to do because this is what science and experience tells us. And great stuff, guys. I really loved it.
Cliff's having technical difficulties. And he's the man to speak on this stuff. I only had a modest contribution in that chapter, but
yes. However, the premise, though, that's how you talk as well in terms of the exercise stuff too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly a big fan. Autoregulation, autonomy. It's we're sort of trying to do ourselves out of a job in a sense, because if you are just blindly following a plan. Not to say that can't be really helpful guardrails in the beginning, but learning to then navigate yourself, to stick with a similar analogy, is a very important skill to learn. And then that doesn't mean you can't still use a map, but it's knowing then if the map doesn't open on your phone, you still know how to recognize landmarks or something like that. I was just talking to a client yesterday. We were talking more about training, but I was saying, what I want to hear from you is, I ended up traveling for work and I was went to a different gym and they had different machines. So I swapped this for that. And I'll be like, yeah, great. That's exactly what I would have told you to do. And they made that decision themselves instead of, I don't know what to do. Daz is offline. It's a different time zone. I may as well just not work out, and it's a similar thing with nutrition.
Yeah, nice one. And auto-regulation, like we're literally just talking about reading your own cues and making your own decisions based on your feedback, right?
Yeah, well, I think that when people are overly prescriptive and they're speaking to the masses, there's always going to be a large number of people that doesn't work for. And this is where I think we have so much, but people want it on a surface level. But do they actually want it or actually need it? And this is where, we have so many people who are biohackers, life hackers, putting out this optimized life type message. You must do these 15 things when you first wake up, and then all these things through the day, and then these things to wind down for bed, and you've got to do this and this and this and this for your training. And the reality is that, any one of those things may be great, but any individual doesn't necessarily need to do them either. And so I think one of the things that we did in the book was open the doors to possibility and give people pathways to action, but also give enough of the clear advice for the key big rocks that they can start putting in place those things. Overriding concepts like we should eat a diet that's mostly based on unprocessed foods. And a really nice idea to help put that into meals is a modular approach, right? And certain things will help you to auto-regulate your energy intake, like getting your sleep right and eating enough protein and eating lots of vegetables and those types of things, all of which come under that sort of modular approach anyway. So I think, I would hope that people can read it and learn a bit more about things like caffeine and fasting and whatnot, and then not be so scared about either doing it or not doing it, or, not freak out about having their coffee in the morning, those types of things, but also take away enough of those actionable points where it is actually quite simple to at least start the process and start to do those key things that really help to improve, health overall. And obviously a big part of the book was a focus on strength, because I think Daz and I both agree that that is such an important part of not just health, but it crosses over to other domains. When I used to speak with my old buddy Steve Angel, who's unfortunately passed on a few years back, he used to always talk about that crossover between the mind, the body, and the spirit when we're talking about strength. Like, you get stronger and you're going to be mentally more resilient. Especially if you're approaching life in a particular way, you're also likely to be more, dare I say it, sort of spiritually resilient and more sort of in touch with yourself because you're stronger within yourself.
I feel like if we're thinking about strength and thinking about muscle, and I will get to these questions that ChatGPT spat out soon, but something's actually been on my mind, and I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts. And this is like just me chatting to you guys as a mate. Like, I'm in the gym 2 or 3 times a week, most weeks actually, and I work to the point where and I've gotten much better at this over the last, let's say, 4 years of working to the point where the last 1 to 2 reps are particularly hard, but particularly in the last set, whether it might be 3 sets that I'm doing most of the time. Sometimes it's 4, depends on what it is. I basically focus on more larger muscle groups, and my physique has changed somewhat over the last sort of 4 years. But I feel like there's almost like this message of this endless pursuit of muscle. And I'm like, well, what about if I just want to maintain what I've got? Like, is that enough for me as a 48-year-old woman? Can my goal be actually just to try to maintain as much, as I can, rather than have this pursuit of building more and more?
I think so. I mean, it's that spectrum, right? There again, I was chatting to a client yesterday about this. There's certainly a road that leads us to too much muscle, and we look at the public figures right now like The Rock and Dave Bautista and things like that. These guys are all slimming down drastically to the point where social media is like, are these guys sick, or what's happening, or they're off the roids, and maybe they're off the roids, not sick. I hope they're not sick. But I think what a lot of these guys do, you see people finishing up their sporting careers or these action hero phases, and they are realizing that amount of muscle is not a healthy amount to sustain. But certainly at some point there's too little muscle. And what is that? I don't know if, Cliff, if you have any sort of harder numbers or percentages around what that is. But yeah, that's the case. Is at some point after 40, we're generally just trying to hold on to what we've got. And again, we're now coming back to like, what was your athletic sporting exercise history like through the 20s and 30s? At what point are you starting with? So certainly I'm talking to some clients where we are certainly talking about adding muscle and it being a priority, even as we're hitting 40 or 50 or even 60, right? And to generalize, the older they are and if they are female, usually that's where the conversation is more trending, right? And it's a constant frustration for me to hear women feeling like they are being force-fed protein, excessive amounts of protein, and this very masculine strength training protocol. But what it is unfortunately, it's just this big divide between where they were in their 20s and how they practiced nutrition and exercise. And suddenly they're arriving at 40, and it seems like this big shock and this big contrast between how they used to behave nutritionally and exercise based. And that's a shame. And so it's suddenly like, no way, you're trying to turn me into a bodybuilder. But really what we're trying to do is sort of bring them up into this median level. I'm going on a bit of a tangent now, but yeah, Cliff, what you got to add to that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is also about what people do versus what the outcome is likely to be, right? And, Daz brings up some really good points of people like, Dave Bautista and The Rock and whatnot, and Dorian Yates, who now does a lot of endurance activity and stuff like that. The reality is they're still very well-muscled people. And previously they would have been doing a huge amount of volume. They would have been obsessed with their nutrition to maybe a point where it's not necessarily healthy. all the other things with the performance enhancing drugs and whatnot. And so for those people, it's about bringing it back to health through what they're doing in terms of their process. If we're looking at where most people are, especially those people over 40, probably the majority of people don't have enough muscle, and they'd be better off building some reserve, or at the very least, like you say, maintaining what they have, because that muscular decline and that sarcopenia over time is a real risk factor for later health issues, right? And, as we all know, the things that we do to, say, retain muscle, especially if we're not eating enough, or gain muscle, are actually very similar. Strength training, eating enough protein, not necessarily having to take in excessive amounts, but certainly eating sufficient amounts of protein, strength training, taking care of some of the other factors that help us to do those other health behaviors as well. So I think a lot of people put the cart before the horse when they're worrying too much about, well, what's going to happen? Because it's like, well, it's not going to happen until you do something. And the reality is, we all know that, especially with, say, women over 40, it's very rare. The exception would prove the rule for people to gain muscle too quickly, right? Even for us guys, it's not easy always to gain muscle. We can certainly do it, but it's not like it's going to be 10 kilos of muscle in the next 6 months. So, the process is critically important. And I think this is where a lot of people derail themselves, because they're already worrying about what's going to happen if I do this or that, versus, hey, what am I not doing now? And what are the simple things I can start to put in place right now to just be healthier, to feel that little bit better, to have more energy, and also long term, to reduce my risk of falling when I'm 70, breaking my hip, having cardiovascular disease, those types of things.
You know what, guys? I speak to so many women who are healthy. They're like metabolically healthy. They are they're at a healthy body weight, i.e., not at a body weight that causes them, to be unhealthy from a metabolic standpoint. They love yoga. They love to hike. They might chuck a dumbbell in there occasionally, but literally the last thing that they ever want to do is do anything to do with strength training. Yet cardiovascularly, they're fit. They're not going to be doing a HIIT session anytime soon, that's for sure. None of the sit business, but they're out hiking in the mountains, walking, 60 to 120 minutes a day, and doing yoga maybe 3 or 4 times. Like, are those people doomed? What message would you have for these women? And is there a way for them to actually avoid any other type of training but still actually live a long, healthy life? Like, what do you reckon?
They're certainly going to do better than the average person. Like you've sort of described some of these blue zones and things like that. People do very well simply being active. But I certainly, to come at it another way, I talk to so many people who are basically that avatar. And, it's not really a switch that gets thrown, at a certain age, but at some point there's suddenly this awareness that stuff's getting harder. Why do I seem to be gaining body fat when I haven't changed a thing about my diet? Why am I suddenly making that groany old person noise when I get up out of the chair? Oh, heck, I just suddenly realized
I do that, though,
that I can't get up off the floor. But that's for sympathy. You're milking it. It's like, you kids, look what you've done to me. And I think it can creep up. And it's again, strength training. I did a post just yesterday. I think it was something along the lines of, we don't end up in assisted living because of a poor VO2 max. It's frailty, it's loss of strength, and it's often that I'm stuck on the toilet, had to call for help, that suddenly people realize they're in trouble, and that is strength training. It's loss of muscle. I sometimes get conflicted. I want to say muscle building and bodybuilding instead of strength training and resistance training, because I sometimes feel like we say strength and resistance training to avoid scaring people with the words muscle building. And they go hand in hand to a certain degree, but strength training is a way to kind of sneak it in past people who are scared of gaining muscle, and I wish it wasn't the case.
Yeah, I would say that the key is progression, and that's where most people miss out. And I think this is why the research on strength training, although it's very strong, like I would say, despite what a lot of people are saying nowadays about, zone 2 is the key and all this kind of stuff, I think if we pragmatically look at the research, a progressive approach to strength training is going to give the biggest bang for buck, which is not to say you shouldn't do the other stuff. You absolutely should. But it's the area that a lot of people are also not doing. The key, though, is irrespective of whether you're in the gym or whether you're doing something else. Like, let's take yoga, for example. The reality is that a lot of people who are that avatar you described, Mikki, they're not necessarily approaching it in a progressive way. So they might go to their yoga class a couple of times a week, and it's the same kind of stuff they're used to, and so they're not really adapting as a result. If they were taking a really progressive approach to their yoga, learning new skills, doing more advanced poses, it's really infinite how challenging you could make that, right? And I think anyone who was 70 years old and doing yoga-derived handstands and handstand push-ups and all sorts of things, they're going to be pretty freaking strong, and they're probably going to preserve their muscle. But the reality is that a lot of people aren't necessarily looking at it in that way. Now, not only would that have benefits to their body in a similar fashion to strength training, but one of the things I like to drop in to my sort of recommendations is do the things you love. Because even if we're doing, let's say, a minimum effective dose approach to strength training, because you should really just do that just to make sure you're foundationally strong, holding muscle, etc., there are other benefits that come from being involved in something that you're passionate about, and especially when it's complex and you're learning new things all the time. So, for example, yoga, if you're taking a progressive approach and you're doing new poses, they're neuromuscularly challenging, and that's going to help to offset, Alzheimer's and, reduce your risk of Parkinson's and things like that, as would doing any other complex sport, like your jiu-jitsu is a great example. It's as mentally challenging as it is physically, to the point where, people are getting those sort of dual benefits. So I don't think that people will not get results if they're doing some of those things. They just need to take that really progressive approach to it. Part of that's play, right, as well. Experiment, have fun. It's not about getting to a point of, oh, I can do it now. I once had a guy, a strength coach, say to me, oh, you're giving a power clean workshop this weekend. Will I be able to do a perfect power clean at the end of the day? Like, as if that was the metric. It's like, I don't know someone who can do a perfect power clean. And I train with Richie Patterson, and I'm coached by Nigel Avery and Richard Dryden and all these, great coaches and around these great weightlifters. They're still refining their craft infinitely. Even when they come to the end of their career, it's like, I never quite perfected the technique, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting with like both of your viewpoints on sort of what we need to maintain our health across the lifespan, basically. Because a bit of pushback I actually see on social media, and I've gotten myself when I talk about the likes of protein or strength training, is, well, my parents didn't do that, and they're really healthy at 85 or something. And, so dismissing the idea that we need to even focus on these things because our parents never did. And look, they're fine.
But they're not. It's a garbage argument, because most people at that age are not physically able, and they're getting worse. Now, we see exceptions, and some of them are lucky. Some of them, it's actually because what they're doing or what they've done their entire lives. If you keep, you're on a farm and you're a farmer and you keep loading those bales until you're 70 and then you retire, yeah, for a while you're going to hold on to that. If you're like my old man who trains in the gym and plays tennis and touch and all that kind of stuff and is a real nugget at the age of whatever it is, 76 or so, like, yeah, you're going to retain some pretty good health, but you're actually doing the things that, we're sort of suggesting, unless you're that unicorn. And in that case, again, it's a great example of the exception proves the rule.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, that there's not much, the comparison is quite mild, because if you've done nothing your whole life, and then you're looking back, like, you sort of haven't lost a lot of capacity, but you never had it to begin with. And we see those sort of graphs where an active person, their sort of longevity or their health span or whatever the metric is, and it's this very straight line and then a very long drop off. And then an athlete, it's up here and the drop off seems a little steeper. And that's often why I struggle with older ex-athletes. They have this loss of ability because the angle around the curve seems so great, and they're thinking back to their former self. But of course, when it comes to in days, that point is still so much further above the person who's done nothing. And so this person down here looking back, there's hardly any change. And they're like, yeah, I've still got it. It's just like, sorry, Bill, you never had it to begin with.
That's a really good point too, Des, because I remember we talked about this with Mike Huffam years ago on a little potty. We also talked about that idea that let's take when you're younger, right? Maybe it's different for kids nowadays, but when we were growing up, of course, we did a lot of activity. And at lunchtimes, you're running around playing touch and you're playing tennis and you're doing this and that. And then you maintain a lot of health and fitness and strength and whatnot through your 20s, maybe into your 30s. And you kind of think it's because of what I'm doing now. Like, so in my case, it was doing some weightlifting and getting back into martial arts and those types of things. But I think I was still physically degrading to some point because I wasn't doing all of that multimodal activity. But you just don't realize until you get to a point where it's like, well, I can't really step laterally anymore. I'm not that explosive with those, multimodal movements anymore. And so I think a lot of people, they come to, let's say, retirement age, and there's a little bit of lag there, especially if they've had a physical job where it's like, oh, I'm still in pretty good nick. Yeah, but how are you declining, and how fast is that decline? And, a key then goes back to process. So irrespective of where you're at now, what are you actually doing? Like, are you strength training? Are you doing fun things? Are you challenging your mind? Are you sleeping well? Are you doing all those various things? Because if not, at the very least, you won't be as healthy, resilient, as functional as you could be. So why wouldn't you want to do that? Especially when you can achieve pretty good results from, to be honest, not a lot of time input, right? There are minimum effective dose protocols, which we talk a lot about in the book, which allow people to get really good results from a limited input.
I feel like with that last point, that's really going to be beneficial for people who do feel time crunch. Who doesn't, though, to be fair? If you've never prioritized physical activity, it's another thing that you need to do. Same thing with, good habits around food. Like if you've never prioritize food prep or meal planning, then of course it seems like this is yet another chore. But if you can do it in a time efficient way, and then ultimately, and I've been thinking about this a lot this week, actually, at the start of anything new, the effort that you have to put in, it is rough. It is a lot of effort. You have to think about it, focus on it. It's not your default. So the lift is really heavy, actually, at the start. And people think, oh my gosh, is this what it takes to do this? There's no way I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my life, without considering the idea that over time, that it becomes habit, and that lift and effort has to diminish because suddenly it's a default, not suddenly, but over time, it's this default behavior. And I think this is a point that people don't often think about when they're sort of contemplating changes like the ones that you guys are describing in the book.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes don't realize what they've heaped on their plate. I have a great garage gym set up and I love training there, but I also have a local gym, and it's nice to get out of the house because I work at home, and I get into conversations with people there, and they'll say things like, oh, I'm just trying to muster up they're already in the gym, but they're still trying to muster up the go to get started. And I say, what are you doing today? And they'll list off this freaking laundry list of movements, and I'll be like, oh, you just described my entire week. No wonder you're still trying to wrangle up the cojones to actually begin your workout. And it's not really a brag, but I kind of do get this weird little ego boost. I love arriving after I've got coach's eyes, right? So I can, at a glimpse, I can see everyone who's in there. I know what they're doing. I know how they're moving, back of their head, all that stuff. And I walk in the gym and I see people engaged in their workouts, and then I'm leaving before they're finished. And sometimes I've come in and I've done a full body workout, and I've noticed the kid in the corner, he was doing bicep curls when I arrived, and he's on his third different bicep curl exercise when I left. And it's that scenario where he's never going to take any advice from me, this old coot walking up to him and trying to help, So it's just sometimes it's like, lost opportunity. But I also get this weird little ego boost in a weird way. I don't wish them to not make progress, but I see this lack of progress, and I know that what I'm doing, it was minimum, it's effective, it ticked the box, it was working. It's a bit weird, but that sometimes kind of gives me the G up. And But yeah, I would love to be able to share it. And so this is how it works. I can't actually speak to someone face to face, but they might read my book, our book, get the
Yeah.
advice that way. Yeah. Sometimes I come home and I say to my wife, I was like, oh, I tried talking to a kid today because he was doing something completely wrong. And he just looked at me like, who's this wrinkly old guy? Like I gave him my best shot. I can remember those old fellas giving me advice in the gym, and I thought they were bloody weirdos as well. I look back and I know they were right, except for the guy who was riding the exercycle wearing a Glad wrap suit. That's been disproved. But yeah, most of the advice was pretty good, and we're circling all the way back to that wisdom and age chat, I guess.
Yeah.
I remember an old dude that used to train at Clive Green's gym when I had a little supplement shop there back in 98 or so. And he used to come in every time. He would either do squats or deadlifts, bench press or military press, and some pull-ups or rows. And we were all like, that's all the dude does? But he must have been 60 years old, very well muscled, strong, fit, functional. And I talked to him a lot about it, and it really changed a lot of my philosophy around lifting, because he was the archetypal example of the older minimum effective dose athlete who was getting great results. Now, one thing that I think is really important is this concept that I'm just sort of playing with at the moment of force versus fun. And so many people are approaching their health or their strength because they feel they need to, right? I need to do, just like when you need to give a speech. Oh no, I need to give the speech, but I'm really nervous about it, because most people would rather approach death than approach a public speaking event, right? According to the research. And so the techniques that people use to try and approach that, forcing themselves, they're either just going to muscle through it, or they try to calm down or suppress their anxiety around it. It doesn't work. The way that has been found in the research to be most effective for improving your public speaking ability is to think about all the positives, the benefits, the fun, the joy, get excited about it, because that's what the anxiety actually is. It's like performance anxiety, right? When we're before an event, it's actually preparing us to do it well. But if we try and push it down, it's like trying to put the top on a boiling pot, boom, it's not going to work. And I think the same is true when we approach nutrition or strength training. So often people like trying to find the perfect thing. I need to find that perfect diet. You may not find it, but hey, why not have some fun? Experiment with some different things. Use some foundational approaches, but find a way that works for you for now. And don't be afraid to play around with some things in the future either. It's not like I will always go in and kettlebell military press and deadlift, and that's all I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I might do that for a training block because I just have no mental capacity to do anything else, and I just want real basics. Other times I might be doing 10 exercises in a session. Usually not, but maybe, right? And so there's a place for playing and having fun with what you're doing too. And when I find, with clients, I find when they start to approach it in that way, it becomes so much different. Because you think about any time in your life that you become excited about something, you don't need to force yourself to do it. You want to do it. Like, even at the age now of, 46, nearly 47, I still look at my training app. It's my own app. I dig it. But I look at my training app the night before. I'm like, I can't wait to get in the gym and train. Because to me, that's fun, right? If I had a plan that was not fun for me, though, of course, it wouldn't be like that. I would feel like, oh, God, I got to force myself to do it. And if people can find those elements of fun that serve their health and their overall sort of life purpose in a different way, then it stops being quite so difficult. They still need to implement those tactics that end up being behaviors, but it's more about then allowing the fun to happen rather than forcing oneself to do something that somebody else said is the best way to do it.
I love that, Cliff. And for both of you, I know that, or at least from what I've seen from you, Cliff, and Daz, I know you're programming pretty well now, that you're very much that minimum effective dose. You hit the key muscles that really matter in a way that makes it effective. And Cliff, just so you know, last week you were putting up on social media like the workouts from your app, I think. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do these this week. And I was a bit disappointed. I only found 2 of them that I did, but I love both of them. Like, I think it was like deadlift and then, I don't know, a row and then like a military press and then one other thing. And I'm like, this was great. And you feel like you get a great workout. you feel like you're hitting most of the groups of muscles that you need to be hitting, and then you're out the door in like 40 minutes. That was awesome.
Yeah, and that's certainly not to say that there aren't, longer approaches that work really well and, high volume approaches. We've all done it. I've done the volume training when I was weightlifting, 10 sets of 10, all that kind of stuff. But the reason I program that way, and there are quite different programs within the app as well, but the reason I program that way is because it started out as basically training with me. This is what I do, and I'm going to post it up in the app, and you can do it as well if you dig it. And I only have a limited amount of time to train in the morning. I get up, I feed the kids, have a bit of fun with them, and then I get in the gym, train, and then I'm into work. And I just don't have it's almost the mental load at the moment as well. I just don't have that mental freedom to think I can put aside 60 or 90 or 120 minutes. It's more like 45 max, and often it's 30 minutes. But hey, I feel now, especially with some of the other digging I've done for my own health, and I took a lead from Daz, actually, because Daz has always sort of said at 40, I want to be, more functional fit than I was at 30. And I've always thought that's really cool mentality. And I was still pretty strong functional at 30. I probably had quite a big decline over my 30s because of some other health stuff going on. But I think at 50, I would definitely be stronger, healthier, and more functional than I was at 40. And that's cool, right? And I can hopefully sort of maintain that, which is not to say that I was ever degraded to any large degree. I've always been all right, but
Yeah, no, I know. And for what it's worth, I feel in a similar camp. Like if I think about me now at 48, I am so much stronger, fitter. I'm not faster, but I'm fitter. And I'm much more functional in how I move than I ever was when I was running at my best in my mid to late 30s. With that really myopic focus, and which was fine at the time, that was my goal. But I think that, but I'm really pleased with how I guess it's my knowledge, my wisdom, the information that I'm garnering now in these later years have really sort of got me to the point where I am. Not that I'm like, this is where I'm not at the pinnacle. It's not like I can no longer improve, but I feel really happy with sort of where I've progressed, which is really nice.
And you no doubt, though, you've seen there's probably someone you follow on social media who is, I'm not going to exaggerate for the example effect, but they're 58 and they've beaten your all-time marathon record. And you're like, heck, like maybe, am I settling too soon? Because, of course, now thanks to social media, we can see that there is someone out there, but of course, they're on their third marriage and they're completely hormonally disrupted and they have an eating disorder and stress fractures in their feet and something like that. But they won't post that stuff, of course. And so we're like, heck, like, I don't want to be average. Am I giving up? And that's something I talk about a lot, and I use that word average quite proudly, is I'm not as strong nor as fit as I was at 40 anymore. I have declined in some performance metrics, but I sleep an extra hour or two a night. I'm much less stressed. I'm far more mobile. I'm carrying more muscle. I have no pain most of the time. Still, there's the odd legacy that will flare up from things I did when I was younger and dumber. But as a rule, in my competitive years, I was sore all the time and my nervous system was fried. I was sort of having to force food down, to fuel the effort. So gut bloated, like this, it was, yeah, I was, I guess, a Ferrari that was constantly needing maintenance because it was so, fragile in that sense. Yet on paper, it could perform very well. But now I'm I don't know, Toyota. Just don't break down.
Yeah, I love it. I love that analogy.
I relate 100% to that because obviously, I'm not when I look at some of the numbers that I put up, and I was never the strongest person on the planet, but I was fairly strong when I was competing. And when I look at some of those numbers now compared to what I can do, it's literally like a different person. It feels like it's absolutely night and day. But to Daz's point, when I was at my absolute strongest, I was also probably underfueled and not sleeping very well because of that, anxious. My mental health was worse. I was in pain all the time because there were things that I just wasn't doing well outside of that, despite looking ripped to shreds and being, performing well and those types of things. And so I think one of the nice things as we get a bit of that additional wisdom, which hopefully will continue to grow over time, is that we start to be more comfortable in our own skin and realize that we can take a slower approach to things, not necessarily be rushing to a record of what we can lift, but be really happy with those key things behind it that help us to live better overall. Right. And if there's one thing that comes through from my whole experience, which has culminated in, getting together with Daz and writing this, it's that idea of not rushing. Because I used to rush all the time. I would have been stronger, set more records, had a better competitive lifting career had I not rushed. Had I not wanted to cut that weight to be competing under 70 or under 75 that year, maybe put on some extra weight, not win the gold, win the bronze. But come back and set some records at a higher weight class, those types of things. It's all about that, rushing to the end post rather than focusing on what's going to give the greatest resilience, which is the thing that really comes in now, right? Sorry, I'm going to digress here again, guys, but I've been working with some really interesting clients lately because they're former athletes who are really committed to their health and fitness. They do a lot of training. They eat perfectly. Everything like on paper looks great. And one interesting thing is in every case, when I've looked at it pragmatically, it's like you do so much activity. If you want to, like if you do it because you love it, that's great. But if you want to free up a little bit of extra time, I have a very strong suspicion that you will be just as fit, probably stronger, probably gain more muscle and be more resilient overall if you cut your volume back. And they've often said, let's try it as an experiment. And a couple of cases that really stand out, like one of these former athletes actually dropped their resting heart rate and has improved their VO2 by doing less. The other one has all of their metrics are basically identical, despite about halving the volume. But now they are stronger and have gained at the age of being in their 50s, I think around 3 kilos of muscle.
Oh, wow.
Over probably a 3-month period.
Oh, my gosh.
Body fat and exactly the same. So pretty cool stuff because they've been blown away and they've said, I'm shocked that I can do less, but be more intentional, more effective, and still have all the same benefits health-wise, all the same enjoyment. In fact, a slightly more and greater enjoyment because I'm more focused, I'm more intentional when I'm lifting. Whereas before it was something I did on the sidelines because I thought of myself as an endurance athlete. And also freeing up now that extra bit of time. Now that time, sometimes they still do extra stuff, but it's just pure fun. Play. That thing I wanted to do, play some guitar, I'm going to do that. I was thinking about picking up pickleball, but I didn't have time before. So now I'm going to try that, right? Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is because I feel like because we do have decades behind us in a certain mindset of how things must be done in order to achieve what we want or maintain, what we've got. It feels like it's difficult to take your foot off that sort of gas pedal and do less, actually. That less is more message is a really hard one for people to learn.
Yeah, especially science sort of has proven that more is better. Categorically, more volume is more results. But that's the important caveat. If you can recover and adapt to it.
Exactly.
But of course, people read the first sentence and sweet. But it's but your sleep needs to be dialed in, plus a nap, food, absolutely perfect, no stress. So yeah, it's are you 25? Do you live at home and your mum cooks for you and you sleep 10 hours a day? Cool, let's go high volume. But the other way is, again, let's just start with less. It's someone, in the old days and when owning a gym and people would buy their skipping rope and they would say, how much do I cut off it? And I said, just start with the least possible because we can always cut more, but we can't take it back once we've cut too much off the rope.
Yeah.
And so it's do 2 sets and go, like you were explaining, work up to that, 1 to 2 reps in reserve, push them hard, see what happens, see how you feel. If you're I'm smoking this and I feel like I've got energy to spare at the end of it, let's try 3 sets in a month's time. And then we'll give that a couple of months and see how that feels. And but I think what happens, even saying that, you'll still notice the sets will start creeping up and the effort will start creeping down because we're built to pace. We're Kalahari, persistence hunting, genetics. We actually prefer to just tone it back a little bit. And so I see that the volume of people's workouts will creep up, but the effort has backslid. And so that's what ends up becoming the stimulus, is the volume. But the problem is now fatigue is coming up as well. And we've got that fitness fatigue hypothesis model. And fitness may go up, but fatigue is also climbing. And at some point, fatigue crosses to a higher point, and it's like, oh, heck, what just happened? It felt perfectly fine up until then. So it's usually better is better, not more is better for the average person, especially us over 40 crew.
And the doable, even if it's imperfect, is better than the undoable perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I think often, especially now with the volume obsession, because I get a lot of people asking me about, there's no upper limit to volume though. So should I just be training more and more and more? It's like, well, how much are you training now? I'm pretty inconsistent. Okay, well, if we look at the research, there's two nuances to the research, I think. Number one, that a lot of people don't appreciate enough, is that the early sets give you the biggest results, like massively. So that first set you do within, 1 or 2 reps in reserve is going to give you probably 80, 90% of the results. And the next one might be another 5 or 10%. And then it starts to plateau off pretty quickly, but there are still incremental gains. But to Daz's point, you've got to be able to recover from it. Similarly for things like meditation, I've talked about this with both of you before. Those clients who say, I know I should, but I'm not. Well, then I sort of say, well, okay, let's remove should. And do you want to do it? Yes or no? If they say no, cool, let's not do that right now. If they say yes, okay, cool. Do you have a minute tomorrow? Yeah, I got a minute. We'll do a minute then. And the next day do 2, the next day do 3. Get to a point that is doable and effective, like, for example, 10 minutes. And the research is also very clear on this, that for most of the benefits of meditation, 10 minutes a day is as effective as 30 minutes or more. Cool, right?
Yes.
There are benefits to longer sessions, but in terms of the majority of the benefit, 10 minutes will do that very well. And most of the benefits, particularly to things like stress, cognition, etc., are apparent on the day of. So there's not always that much lag. So you're better off doing 10 minutes every day than 30 minutes every now and then. I think the same thing is true with strength training. Like, what can you do realistically and what can you do consistently? Then do that. And, to the mental side of things, I completely get, when Daz talks about those types of elements of strength training. Because if I see a program, even if I've written it for myself, and it's got 11 exercises on it, I know that I'm just going to look at it and go, oh, no way. Now, I'll get through it, but probably 60% of the workout will be very unintentional, not very focused, and it's just junk volume. I'm better off cutting back to 3 or 4 exercises, hitting them for 2 or 3 sets and making sure it's really intentional. Better for my recovery, but I'm also going to get better results, I believe.
That does remind me of a couple of things. One is, and I know that I'm pretty sure you're not a fan, Daz, of Dave Goggins. I'm pretty sure, Cliff, you might not like Dave Goggins either. But the one thing he says, which you will both agree with, because you've almost just said this yourself, Cliff, is that, he's like, it's Tuesday afternoon, it's a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and I'm signing up for a 100-miler on Saturday. And he's like, things are always different on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. To your point, like, and I'm the same. I plan these epic runs or these epic sessions in the gym the afternoon or night before I'm going to do it, and then I wake up and think, what the hell was I thinking? I was like, I'm not going to do that. So I appreciate it. It's almost like I confuse ambition. No, only at that moment I'm confusing my ambition with my ability. But in the morning, I'm very aware that I don't have the desire or the ability.
Yeah. Well, and that's where in the book we go into a few concepts that people might be surprised about, like starting off with, what's your why? And I know that is a bit trite nowadays. And there's even a bit of a backlash against it. I know some authors have started saying, who cares about your why? Just do what you can do kind of thing. I still think there is value to at least thinking about that idea, because it helps to put in context the real reasons you want to be, say, healthy and strong. Because if you're doing it because people say, oh, you need to do this for your health, great. And like I've given little talks for you before when you're lecturing, Mikki, about things like the ambiguous nature of health. How many clients do we have come and see any of us and say, I want to be healthy? That's not an objectively desirable goal because it doesn't actually mean anything. What does health actually mean to you? Oh, it means I can do this and this and this, and I can spend more time with my kids, and I can do that job that I love, and I can have more, all those types of things begin to describe someone's life of passion and purpose. They actually need to understand that, because if that context isn't there, nothing's going to be sticky. But they're not going to be able to evaluate things that come up, like you've just mentioned as well. Like, I might get really excited about something. Oh, that's a really cool thing. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start playing the trombone. Because it seems like an exciting thing to do. But when I actually sit back and objectively look at it in my life, it's like, I don't actually want to play the trombone. That was just a fleeting flight of fancy, right? But so many people will then be derailed by that flight of fancy. If we have an idea about our why and our ethos and values, that's always in the back of our mind. It's like, that's not actually going to work with the actual life I want to be living. So I'll just cut that. And I'll do the things that I need to do, that I like to do for my health. And then I'm going to open up time, space, and energy for having some play for other things as well. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't go and grab that trombone and have a play with it, but you might not want to make it a foundational aspect of your life either,
And that's like performance being such a big driver for people. And then at some point, as I was saying, performance has to drop. It's not a forever thing. We don't become these 90-year-old superheroes. And if performance is the only thing we're hanging on to, we don't have any passion or purpose with physical movement, physical expression. It's a real shock to some people trying to figure out how to keep going in the gym. And that's, certainly not to pick on any sporting greats, but we probably all know of one from any particular sport who has declined quite rapidly physically after their competitive career is over, because, for them, it was probably just a job, not necessarily something they enjoyed. And it's reflected in those later years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something it is important, as you said, tried as it is. If you don't have something like that, you won't have that anchor once the performance metrics start to plateau.
That's a really good point too, Des, because a lot of people who are listening and who are over 40, they'll be in that position. And, when I was working with the guys from the Match Fit show, it was really interesting looking at the contrast between some of the players who, admittedly, they report this. They kind of needed the structure and the sport and all those things around them to do the healthy things, but also mask some unhealthy habits. You don't always need to eat perfectly if you're doing all that amount of training if you're part of the All Blacks. Whereas some of the players, like, Carlos was a really good example. He was pretty into his nutrition and strength training, all that kind of stuff anyway. And I mean, the dude's a stud, right? He looks amazing, even at whatever age he is. I was talking with on Friday, and he's now the oldest player in the French Premier League to both play and score a try. He's in his 40s, and he's in great shape. He's in great nick. Now, he is one of those athletes who made a commitment when he was younger to take care of his health, which a lot of athletes don't do. And a lot of us as younger athletes maybe didn't think about that so much. It's all about the performance. It's not about the health underpinning the performance. Now, the health isn't in contrast to the performance, it's the foundation. But you can succeed despite, say, a poor diet or despite sleeping poorly, but you probably won't do it for as long. And, when I was chatting with Ma the other day, he was sort of saying that he probably wouldn't have played as long as he did if he had kept on doing the poorer habit stuff when he was younger. Now, once we're past 40, it's like, well, that's great. I should have done that stuff back then. Hey, it's never too late. Right? I always tell people the story of when I was younger and I wanted to start learning the bass guitar. You guys are going to tell me to learn the bass guitar. I don't want to learn it anymore. But I wanted to learn the bass, right? And I thought, I'm too old now because all my mates are already getting into instruments, they're already in bands and stuff. And then a few years later, it's like my mates have a band. They've got an opening for a bassist. I should have got involved earlier. It's like, oh, no, it's too late now. They're going to fill that hole and whatever. A few years later, they lose their bassist again, right? At any stage, I could have picked it up and actually just done it. So it's never too late to start, lifting something, to start going for that longer walk, to do things that you dig doing because they're good for your brain. Start playing chess. play your word games. Do what you got to do.
To be honest, Cliff, when you were telling that story, I was wondering whether Cliff was then going to tell me that his mates were like Neil Finn and
No, but they
Brown
are.
and
I'll tell you what, they are New Zealand's most successful hard rock band, though. And I road managed them for about 6 months through Canada and the States.
Oh, amazing.
Many years ago. So, yeah, the band called Like a Storm, and they've had several top 10 hits in the States. And they're very, very successful band.
Okay, well, literally, I am going to Spotify them this afternoon when I'm having my gin and tonic. So, okay, so my question to you both, and I know that people will be reading the book because, of course, you cover this, but it's so esoteric, it's so abstract. What is my why? You know, like people don't know how to actually figure that out because they've got these top of mind things that come to them because we're very much stuck in that sort of the here and now, like, you know, how we feel is sort of driving, you know, what we think. Like, oh yeah, I why? Because I want to lose weight. Why? Because I want to fit into my jeans. And then of course they think, well, that's not enough, I should probably think about my health. But it's actually not actually true. So, you know, for them at that moment, like, so I guess my question is, and again, people will read Awesome After 40 and they'll be able to be sort of guided for this, but can you sort of share with the listeners your best advice as to how to dig deep and find and actually start there? Because I think that's really challenging for a lot of people.
I think it's a process. Like, if it's about fitting into the jeans, cool. Like, hold on to that and just start. You know, but then just be open to what's next, because once you can fit into that pair of jeans, are you going to pick a smaller pair of jeans and start again? Some might don't recommend that. Again, what's after size 0? Is there smaller than size 0, Mikki? I hope not.
Yeah, there is. There's 0.
Of course there is.
I think there is. Yeah.
But hopefully my point still stands. That usually at some point the goalposts need to shift, and instead of I at least be just open to, instead of picking another goalpost that's the same, a different kind of goalpost. So it goes from and you know, we talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic goals. So extrinsic goals tend to be kind of that spark that get us going, but intrinsic goals will be the fuel that will keep that fire alive, so to speak. And we don't need any fuel to get a spark first, if I keep this analogy working. But the spark disappears almost immediately, and you need to strike another spark. And so at some point, if you want a fire, you need some fuel, and that comes from intrinsic motivation, intrinsic based goals. But just start with what works. Like, again, as Cliff said, you gotta actually get going. You got to do the minimum. And so let's get that happening, and then we can start tidying things up. You know, it's a perfect is the enemy of good kind of scenario. Get some good stuff happening, and we can always start improving it from there. But yes, let's make sure we are thinking about it at some point. Otherwise, you'll run out of steam.
I really love that, because so many people get paralyzed by, again, it's the idea of having to do it perfectly. So if we say, you know, probably a good idea to, before you even start something, look at your why. Fuck, I don't know what my why is. And then they don't start. So I think, one of the things I love about Darren's approach is it's so practical. You know, if you've got a why, that's enough. You can start. And I think what people can often then do, and they do this often naturally once they get started, but they can also do it a little bit intentionally as well at times, is start to ask the second why and the third why. You know, I want to get into those jeans. That's my why. Well, why do you want to get into the jeans? Oh, because I'll be smaller then, and, I'll be more attractive. Well, why is that important? Why do you want to be, and they'll get to a point there where they start to go from the extrinsic motivators naturally into the intrinsic. Because, I want to, I often use the example of that client who comes in and says, I want to run a marathon in 3 months. Great goal. Why do you want to do that? Oh, because I haven't run for 20 years. And so I feel like I'll get fitter, and that'll make me healthier, and I'll have better energy. Great. Why do you want to be fitter and have more energy? Because at the moment, I don't have the energy at the end of the day to play with my kids. Okay, well, why is that important? I love my kids, and I want to be more at home with the family. I've also got this job that I love, but at the moment I don't feel onto it cognitively enough. And so they start to then go from performance goal, I want to run a marathon, to, hey, my bigger goals are to be a great father and be creative and be great at what I do and have more energy for all those cool things, right? It goes from, I want to run a marathon in 3 hours to, I want to have a creative, passionate, purposeful life with my family, doing shit that I love. That's the sticky stuff, because once they begin to think about that, there's a really interesting element of neuropsychophysiology where the more ways that we can visualize and perceive the way we want it to be, the more likely it is that we start to see the things in our environment that will allow that to occur. So once we start, you probably thought about it in your mind's eye then, this person, like I can see myself as that person in my backyard with my kids. I can hear the bird song. I can smell the flowers. I can almost, imagine picking them up. So it's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, right? That's the stuff that really drives neural change. And that's what it's all about, right? Why is this guy talking about neural change? Because it's really important, right? We need to have those things become embedded and locked in up here, translating through the body. Once we do that, everything, I believe, becomes a heck of a lot easier.
Look, I completely agree. And I do think that a lot of what we talk about with diet, exercise, lifestyle, the people's first inherent thought is this, physical transformation, but actually a lot of the skills and habits that you guys talk about and teach in Awesome After 40 is actually, it leads to a much more deeper transformation. You can sort of shift who you are as a person, who you see yourself as a person, you gain in confidence as well. Well, this is aside from all of that stuff that you were talking about, Cliff, but I think this is another very real thing that will then allow someone to think a bit bigger and to actually go a bit deeper as well, because sometimes we fear putting goals in place or thinking big picture because we don't know that we are capable of I don't know, achieving something or of actually getting what we want. We don't quite believe in ourselves. And I just think these things, this area is such a perfect, I don't know, training ground for allowing us to sort of see that we can.
Or we don't have the energy or brain space for it.
100%.
Right? And this is what I know we've all talked about this before. And I've mentioned it, a number of times when you see a client and you might ask them on a snapshot, how do you feel from 1 to 10? Oh, I'm about a 6. I know I could be a lot better. So you get them in a bit of a process. We talk about their goals, etc. They start eating a little bit better. They start doing some strength training, come back into the clinic. How are you feeling now? I'm about a 7, but before I wasn't a 6. I was a 4. I just didn't realize how shit I was feeling. Right? It opens up your possibilities then, because a lot of people don't realize just how much their energy could be improved just by doing a couple of little things. Not being Superman, not doing the Huberman 20-point morning ritual. It's just about doing those simple things. And suddenly, hey, I start to feel that little bit better. Maybe now I have the energy, the cognition to do some of those other things that I've wanted to do. I didn't even realize I had the capability before, but now it's opening up the potential.
Bill didn't realize he didn't have the capacity to begin with. It's basically exactly what Des was saying earlier.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I don't have energy to work out. Well, what's your idea of a workout? Oh, CrossFit class, this 20K run. No, it's anything. It's all on a spectrum. So you have the energy to do something, figure out what that is, and do that. Yeah. And stuff will start to shift.
Okay, so if you had to remove everything you knew about training and health for people over 40 and keep only 20% that gives 80% of the results, what would stay? And what would be the non-negotiable?
So we're just talking broad principles, like I said, strength training?
Yep.
Or yeah.
Yes.
So,
yep.
Strength training, eat protein, sleep. Walk. 4 things.
The man who struggles with his steps. You're doing much better. You're doing much better, Daz. Yeah.
I think in terms of the physical, I would say, strength training and getting in those 7,000 steps a day, just as a bare minimum. So let's say you're doing 2, even 30-minute sessions a week of strength. you could actually do less, but let's say 30 minutes a week of strength and getting in those 7,000 steps a day, I think you're going to cover your bases pretty well. Nutrition-wise, there are a lot of really simple tactics, but one thing that comes to mind that I think is really interesting is the idea of mindfulness, and along with that sort of presence and intentionality, because they spring from mindfulness, right? The reason I say that, and I'll again relate this by way of analogy, my good friend Dr. Joe Klimczewski gave a really good talk at the SNA conference several years ago on basically the ineffectiveness physiologically of non-diet interventions. Now, I know all the non-diet people are going to come after me after this. That's fine. What he was saying was not that they're not effective. They are for improving people's quality of life, mental health, psychological well-being, all critically important. So it's a really important part of what we do as nutritionists or nutrition coaches is that non-diet aspect. But what we've seen in the longer-term research is they're not particularly effective for body fat changes, body composition, or for metabolic health, right? Because people often continue to decline. And so he made a really good point, and he was citing the research, and he was 100% correct. But in a panel the following day, I did bring up one thing. I said, Joe, there's one thing you missed. There is a non-diet intervention that meta-analyses of the controlled trials show is effective for improving those markers, whether it be anthropometry, body fat, metabolic health. It's meditation, mindfulness. And often in studies, when they compare, for example, diet interventions versus mindfulness, the people on the mindfulness protocol eat better and get better results for their health than the people on the dietary intervention. So I think this is a really good example of where there's crossover from things that basically are not seen to be as tactical, but they help us with our health behaviors so much, where people can be more mindful and they're getting off their phones and they're being a bit more intentional, presence. You know, that is probably the number one thing for health, I believe. I've even noticed little things like, you know, we talk about it a lot and most people make an effort to do it, but do we do it well enough? If I'm with the kids, put the phone away. I'm not always perfect at it. And when I'm not perfect at it and I get my phone out, I know that I'm more reactive. I might be more, quicker to anger. I might be, all of those things I don't want to be. Is it about the phone or is it just about being present? I think it's about being present, aware, all that kind of stuff. And so, sorry, I've talked too much. I'll summarize again. Lift some heavy stuff, get out for a walk, and be mindful.
Nice. I love it, guys. Okay. If you could wipe one fitness industrial complex myth, clearly this is ChatGPT, from the face of the earth, what is the one fitness myth that you would want to see die right now?
Right now?
Yeah, right now.
It's that women are fragile little flowers who shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that because they're going to destroy their hormonal health and they're going to basically fail. I think, again, I'm a man saying this, and so people are going to come after me, but I think that it's been so disempowering for women to hear these messages that you should not train hard or you should not fast even if it works for you, or you should not do low carb even if it works for you. Because the reality is there is such a massive variability between women, and there's a lesser variability between men and women, even though there are differences. We all, respect that. But it's almost like we're pinkwashing and disempowering under the guise of empowerment. And the thing that I see most commonly now is that is something that's failing women. I go back to the example of my own coaching, which some people would look at ostensibly and say, oh, well, it's fairly masculine focused. But the reality is there are women who are thriving under that environment because they just like the simple approaches to doing the hard stuff. Great, do that. Don't be, bound by the sex that you were born or the gender that you identify with. Those things are not important. And even the idea that strength is a masculine trait is bullshit, right? I was, in my competitive days, a strong person. There are women who were stronger than me. Are they any less a woman or are they any less feminine? No, they're just strong. It's a distinct thing. So that's the thing that's probably one of my biggest bugbears at the moment. Come after me, stratosphere. Do your worst.
I back that one, mate, and perhaps just a slight tangent from it and similar is I haven't got the idea fully formulated in my head, but there's some kind of conflict or contrast between what people seem to, or how hard people think that they need to train, how hard and how much to do. We're getting bombarded with this message of more, 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 harder, harder. And yet, as a group, as a population, we seem to be training less hard. So it's a weird one where I see like this messaging of more, and people are taking it on board. But then when I see it out there in the wild, I don't seem to see that effort population-wise being reflected. And it's, yes, taken on to Cliff and to generalize, it's the pink dumbbells kind of scenario. And that's an interesting one, but it's men and women alike. I'm sort of seeing this as a population. And so that's an interesting one we don't need to do it all. We don't need to do top 1% stuff, but we probably need to do a bit more than we currently are.
This is a slight tangent, but slightly related as well, is like, Cliff, you mentioned about, different protocols for different sexes and all this information, and people are getting a bit confused, or at least if you didn't say that, that's what I was thinking about as you were talking about that. And this is very unpopular to say, but I'll say it anyway. I think that there are people who just hide behind the idea that they're overwhelmed just to continue being, to do nothing. It's like, oh no, there's too much information. People are just arguing with each other. So I don't even know what to do. So I'm going to do nothing, and that's their excuse. And maybe is that a cynical thing to say? Probably. But I have certainly had people relay stuff to me that I clock immediately that it's nothing to do with what they're telling me. They're overwhelmed. They're just not in a space to do it. And actually, maybe that's what they need to own. That's okay too, like.
I see it in the nutrition space. It's the classic one was like, oh, bloody nutritionists, first eggs are good for you, then they're bad for you, then they're good for you again. Like, I may as well just have a cigarette and a chocolate bar.
Yeah. You must be loaded if you can smoke. I saw a guy today, actually. I did. I legit. Yeah, I know, actually. And I literally saw a guy today as we were running. This is well off our topic. And we were running past, and he just lit a cigarette. And it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. And the first thought that went through my head was, that guy must be rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too good.
It used to be that the person who was running, you think, they got, spare time and they can afford the flash running shoes and stuff. Now it's the guy walking along smoking. I don't think that's unfair to say, though, Mikki, because I think it's the difference between reasons and excuses. There are reasons why, and we're all aware of them, there are reasons why certain people are far more disadvantaged, whether that be socially, economically, the psychosocial determinants of health is a massive factor. But on the other hand, irrespective of where we're at now, we still have some personal responsibility. I'm not one of these hustle and grind people who's like, it's all about the sweat off my own back and blah, 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 because we live in a society. So that's all very important. But, I see it a lot in the realms of mental health, and I'll only speak to an area that I can relate to very easily. I've seen a lot of people, and some of them prominent people in the fitness industry, who have used their mental health conditions, in particular bipolar disorder, as an excuse for really bad behavior. Right? It's, it's just my bipolar coming out. It's kind of like, yeah, but dude, I've got bipolar and it doesn't make me racist. It doesn't make me a sexual predator. It doesn't make me misogynistic. No, it makes things more difficult sometimes, but we all have an ability to recognize the challenges we have and do our best to do the work we need to do to live the lives we want to live. Not for anyone else, but just to have, the lives we want to live. And I know from experience that if I wasn't sleeping well, if I was allowing the stressors to mount up where I could maybe avoid them or mitigate them, where I'm not eating well, where I'm not getting in that strength training, where I'm not being mobile, then my mental health would decline to the point where I probably wouldn't be a nice person to be around. Maybe I'm not a nice person to be around sometimes, but it would be far more than that, right? And so that there is an element of personal responsibility, and no one can ever, I think, refute that. despite it being complex and despite us living in our whole environment and being affected by that, hey, there is some degree of autonomy that's really important too.
And sometimes people don't think they have that autonomy, actually. That it's their mindset is they've got no choices, actually. And which is something I don't agree with as well. But,
well, it's about, it's the fractal nature of it. And I think there's that, it's complex because we all have advantages and disadvantages. And I think it's really important to recognize both, and that helps to break down some of the garbage around, well, I just built everything off the sweat of my own back. Well, no, you didn't necessarily, because you might have had privileges, advantages, you live in a good society, those types of things. However, did you also have challenges because of various things? Yes. And some people have more challenges, some people have fewer. But at the end of the day, again, what are you going to do? Although I have disagreed with some of his political stuff of late, I still really like the idea embodied by Jocko Willink of extreme ownership. It's not your fault, but what you do is your responsibility. Easy message, right? And I think it makes sense.
Nice one. I'm mindful of the time, guys, but I do want to ask you just one last question, if that's all right. So you're doing an audit of your own life. And I know, and obviously there are things which, you guys are just, healthy human beings. But if there is one thing which is your work on, what is that? Yeah, what is that? Like, it might be a surprise to some people, it might not be, but something where you're doing something and you're like, I haven't quite nailed that, or I haven't quite dialed it in, or this is a struggle. I'm on a bit of a struggle bus with it, or you sort of go through waves. Anything? Probably not, but.
It's optimism. With my wife and I just recently made this sort of collective decision to just work a little harder on that. And we're certainly not negative Nellies by any stretch of the imagination. But by gosh, is it easy to latch onto anything, right? And have a bit of a whinge about it. And it solves no purpose. I'm literally sometimes the angry old man in the street waving his fist at young kids on these freaking electric dirt bikes. Hate them, right? I'm out walking with my dog and my little girl. And I realize I'm this close to kicking one of them into traffic, which is not going to come back on me very favorably, is it? So, but as just one extreme example, it's whinging about the weather, whinging about politics, what someone did, said, acted. It doesn't matter. And if we pull back a bit and we live at the beach, we can work remotely, we've got a great life, we holiday all the time, whatever, there's so many fantastic things going on. But boy, it can get its hooks into you so quickly. You can switch from this life of privilege to this, that, and the other. Yeah. So just try not to think negatively. Try not to speak negatively about anyone or anything. That's been our little one at the moment.
Nice.
That's really cool. Mine's very similar, and the framing though is more for me. It's a constant reminder to be present and to be intentional. And, that can spring up in a whole bunch of different ways. It might be that you are distracted by something else, but especially with kids, if you're distracted by something else, there's going to be a time in a few years when you're going to say, that was so unimportant to be distracted by that work-related thing, or what that person said on social media or whatever, when I could have been playing with that kid, or I could have been spending time with my partner, or just really, and not just spending time, but actually enjoying the time, right? So it's that presence, and along with that is that intentionality. I remember when I was on the radio years ago talking about one of my books, which got a little bit of press back in the day. One of the things that I talked about a lot that people just, especially the radio DJs, just didn't really seem to get. I think you could tell in their eyes, they just thought, this guy's talking some crap here. It was about that whole idea of when you're doing something, just remind yourself that you're doing it. What am I doing right now? I'm lifting, then lift. What am I doing right now? I'm with my kids. Then be with your kids. It seems like such a simple thing, but when we have that constant call to action to do it, we find that the richness of life is so much more enhanced. Because if you're not, right, if you're doing something, but you're thinking about that thing down the road, or that thing you've got to do tomorrow, or the fact that your bank account only has $2.37, like mine did when I came back from Canada broke, then you're not going to enjoy that time fully that you're experiencing. So that's really the thing. And in terms of health, it's more important than people think, because it's the thing that means that at around lunchtime, after I've had my lunch, if I'm being present and intentional, I'm more likely to do my little meditation, which has a big crossover to the rest of my life. If I'm not, like, I'm stressed, I've got to do all this stuff, I'm just going to launch straight into it, then maybe that carries over to not having vegetables at dinner because, oh, bugger it, I had some at lunch. Then maybe that carries over into, I'm going to have a big chocolate milkshake after dinner because why not? You know, it's not that any of those things are wrong. And if I'm actually intentional about any of those things, they're also great. But it's not coming from a place of presence and intention if it's just a resignation.
It's interesting, that point. Yeah, Cliff. I know someone who is all about gratitude, but actually her whole energy is negative, and it's she gets very fired up on really small things that you need to talk her off the cliff about. It just holds a lot of negative energy. And I just think from an absolute health perspective, if your nervous system is like that, holy cow, like that, and that actually speaks to both the optimism piece and the sort of being present thing, because if your nervous system is in that state and you're anxious and you're angry and you're negative, then you're obviously not present in the moment, right?
And I think with, the journey till now, which has sort of culminated in us jotting down a few ideas for this book, I think I've certainly realized, and I think Des and I have talked about this a little bit in different terms before, that a lot of when you're younger, or maybe if you haven't really come to some degree of comfort within yourself, a lot of what you're doing is performative, and it's not necessarily performative for others, it's performative for yourself. As you guys know, I've been meditating and doing yoga since I was a little kid because I saw my old man doing it. But let's say in my 20s, it was very much about doing the meditation because I'm one step away from enlightenment. When I'm enlightened, I'm going to write great books and everyone's going to think I'm some kind of spiritual guru. I'm going to be awesome, right? You come to a point where it's like, what the fuck am I thinking about here? This is like not the reason to do it. It's not important. It's all just garbage. So what do you do then? You sit in stillness. And that's it. That's enough. Right? And when you can get to that point, I think, irrespective of the fact that any of us sitting here are completely imperfect and we fuck things up all the time, and that's okay. But we're more comfortable in that position of knowing that we've got a lot of work to do, and that's fine because it's fun.
Yeah.
And you're just doing it with intention and presence.
Nice.
Love it, mate.
Yeah. And just to clarify to the listeners, none of us are actually sitting because
we're not actually.
We're all standing because this is what we do as our.
Or is Des sitting?
Oh, Des, are you sitting?
I am sitting currently. It's this weird thing where if the standing desk goes up, it's up like for months. And if it gets put down for any reason, it stays down for bloody months before I seem to get it back up again.
You've got very good sitting posture because you do look like you are. You do look like you're standing.
I just try to.
Okay, well,
I'm just trying to look as big as Cliff.
Well, okay. So before we let listeners know about your book, let me rate you on your performance this morning, guys. I think Cliff has to take it because he has 2 pictures of me behind him in 2 different conferences.
And there's Darren on the wall too.
Where's Darren?
Where?
Oh,
well, that's
yes.
just. Did you
Amazing.
arrange that just for this, or has it always been that way?
I didn't. That's just the way it is.
I love that. And Dazza, you brought the big surprise to the party because I think this is the first time I've seen you in a non-tight t-shirt.
Oh.
He still fills it out pretty well, though.
Interesting.
Yes, yeah. But I'm like, come on, Daz. Normally, Daz is topless in a tank top or slightly tighter t-shirt. But hey,
well,
you look gorgeous regardless. You look gorgeous regardless.
Thanks. I've tried to actively not portray that look, so obviously I'm going to have to do a bit more work on it.
No, mate, no, own it. Oh, seriously, like, if I was, how old are you?
50.
If I was a 50-year-old male with a bod like yours, honestly, like, I would, I'd be all about it. Okay.
Oh, come on. If I were a 30-year-old male with a bod like Darren's,
Yeah.
I'd be all about it.
Yeah, actually, to be fair. Anyway, sorry to
Love
embarrass
you
you,
guys.
Darren. Sorry, Daz.
Not in the least. It's harder to embarrass me these days. I'll take that all as a compliment.
Well, what I would love to see is a poster of both of you behind Cliff on a book tour for Awesome After 40, but I would be a bit jealous because I wouldn't be part of that. So I don't know what we can do. Maybe I can manage you guys on tour. How can people get a hold of Awesome After 40?
They can find it at any major online retailer at the moment for pre-order. And after the 25th of November, it'll be available basically everywhere. So on at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Kobo, and all other major outlets. You can also request it from your local bookstore or the library.
That was a question I actually had for you, Cliff. It was a hard copy. I had a couple of questions around alternatives to Barnes & Noble for some of the local residents. So there's going to be some options soon.
Yeah, and it's got full global distribution. So if for whatever reason people go into their bookstore and it's not there, they can just ask and the bookstore will get it in, no problems.
I love it. And I'm hoping to rustle up a few for a giveaway for this podcast interview as well. Guys, let me know how, or let the listeners know how they can find you guys. Although you are like multiple repeat offenders on my podcast, but let them know just in case they are unaware.
DarrenEllis.coach is the website, and also my Instagram handle. Those are two places I'm hanging out.
Wonderful.
And people can find me at cliffharvey.com, and that's got links to the Institute and all my socials and stuff.
And your app, right?
Yeah, which they can find at cliffharvey.com as well. They can find the Coach by Cliff app.
Amazing. And Darius, do you have an app?
I use an app. I'm currently working on my app. But yeah, it's the same thing. At the website, there's links to programming and coaching. That all is delivered in that fancy 21st century fashion.
I love it. Amazing, guys. I always love sitting down with you. Thank you so much for standing. Thanks so much for making the time, and catch you soon.
Thanks, Mick.
Thanks, Mikki.
Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed having that chat. It's always so fun to catch up with those guys. And as I said, keep an eye out on social media as to where you can win yourself a copy of Awesome After 40 by Darren Ellis and Dr. Cliff Harvey. Next week on the podcast, we bring Brandon back for another episode based around his fat loss approach that he undertook this North American summer, and he took us through the structure of it, the strategies he used. This is really high level intervention, and he's sharing with us his method, so you aren't going to want to miss that. Until then, though, you can catch me, Mikki, over on Instagram, Threads and X at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website, mikkiwilliden.com, book a one-on-one call with me. All right, team, you have the best week. See you later.